Evidently, Blizzard does something wrong. Blizzard, I'm begging you, don't take this massive L. I don't know what this is about, but we'll see. Or maybe we will.
Blizzard, this isn't it. I 100% understand what you're going for. It is a noble goal.
Zoomers and Coomers,
I think you're accidentally ignoring the one thing.
Maybe you're right, Tundra. Maybe it's a horrible
is more
idea.
important than any design goal you have, and that thing is fun. These new Mythic Plus affixes are just not fun. With every other change in Dragonflight leading players into better experiences, more fun, less headaches, this philosophy is holding back what is clearly one of your favorite game modes from being absolutely beloved. So let's get into what Blizzard have done and why people are having a very large reaction.
So what's going on?
They announced the Season 2 Mythic Plus changes, and this is amidst the backdrop of very stark player feedback in Season 1 of this expansion.
Season 1
for a number of reasons that I just don't have time to get into right now. We'll touch on them later. Here's the changes. Quaking, Volcanic, and Grievous have been removed from the game. And this makes sense. Volcanic forced extra movement. Quaking was the subject of ridicule for forcing people to spread, and Grievous was a healer mechanic that honestly wasn't that bad, but as a Disc Priest, I'm glad it's gone.
Yeah, Grievous was
Explosive
horrible.
also got changed. Fewer spawn, but with...
It was a healer mechanic, but as a tank, I absolutely hated it. It was also a tank mechanic, because you had to pace yourself, you had to watch your shit. I freaking hated that shit.
Quite a bit more help, turning them into a group problem rather than just a healer problem. Now, that's probably going to cause a few issues. But anyway, these were removed and they have been replaced. But with affixes that sadly seem to prove that, at least initially with this design, Blizzard have missed the point entirely. They prove that Blizzard either doesn't understand or does not wish to act on or under-indexes the issue that I think most players have actually been talking about with Mythic Plus affixes, which is just that they're not fun, that they're a big serving of sludge applied atop a dungeon that otherwise would be better designed if they weren't there from a gameplay experience, albeit we need to talk about the weekly variation thing at some point today. Now, Grievous was removed just to be replaced with Afflicted, which is another healer mechanic. An NPC spawns with low health, a curse, a disease, and a poison. If you either dispel it or heal it, then yeah, that's fine. But if you don't help it within 10 seconds, it will reduce all players' haste humongously by 10 seconds, which is a pretty damn large punishment.
Yeah.
But yes, solving the mechanic is easy enough. Just dispel, just throw a heal. Off healers like Paladins, Druids.
It's easy, but man, sometimes easy is hard. And it kind of sucks when you're dependent on somebody to get a mechanic right.
And Shamans could even dispel or maybe even heal it if the healer is busy.
And then everyone bitches at the healer.
That as a nice little
and then everyone leaves the group.
Design. Imperial is new and adds spawns for 20 seconds.
Yeah, this sounds even worse.
But it's susceptible to all forms of crowd control. It has an 8-second cast that will drop damage and healing by 50% for 10 seconds, which is a really tough punishment, but it is an easy solve, I guess. Just throw like 3 interrupts at it, or maybe 2 like perfectly timed ones so that it despawns. Maybe hit it with a paralyze and ignore it, because yes, it's immune to AoE, which means you don't need to worry about a CC break. And then we've got Entangling, which is the one that's pissed people off. I don't think it's pissed people off because it's hard. I think it's just pissed them off because it's annoying. So, you know those quests where you have to basically pull in a vine and you're super slow until you snap the vine?
Right.
Well, imagine having to randomly do that in combat, but if you fail, you get a 3-second stun. And now you can see why people are pissed.
You know what else I can see with this whole entangling thing is people pulling other mobs. Because people want to break the vine and they won't be looking. They'll just run off in a direction and pull another mob in. That sounds absolutely horrible. As a blood DK, I mean, I'm just gonna use Death's Advance and just easily get away from it. But everyone else is gonna kind of get screwed. I just see so many problems coming up with this thing.
You have 8 seconds to move 10 yards,
sounds horrible.
Which will be easy if you can disengage, blink, use freedom, or anything like that will outright solve it. And you may have also noticed something else that I've loaded all of these statements with, that all of these are very easy to deal with. But this is where we elaborate, because that is entirely in isolation. Just dispel for Afflicted is fine. Until you're in a situation when you actually need your dispel and full healing attention, or someone dies. Maybe think of like the final boss of Jade Temple, which, yeah, isn't going to be in this season, but it's an example, right? So one of those situations, you're overloaded, and really it's the affix that kind of ruins things for you. Now, Blizzard may be like, well, yeah, that made it harder. But for a lot of people, that doesn't feel like they're playing the dungeon and they lost the dungeon. It feels like they're playing Mythic Plus and they lost the Mythic Plus thing coming in and ruining their dungeon. I think there's a lot of very interesting cognitive things with this and how these systems are framed to players. I'll put those aside for now. It's going to have the same issue that Quaking did, though, because around 98% of the time it will be fine, but the 2% of the time where it creates a nigh unsolvable problem, then players just got to ask, is this worth it? And obviously not even to speak about what this does to class selection, because, oh, it's Afflicted week? Well,
yeah.
Druid Shaman week. If you're
Druid
playing a
Shaman
rogue,
week,
maybe
right.
log out and come back next week.
Yeah,
I mean,
that sucks. When a mechanic is so favorable to a certain class, that just creates a whole issue of that week being shit for some people.
Who knows? The damage might still be incredible,
2%.
though. Same with Incorporeal. It's an easy solve, but it spawns randomly in the middle of a pack that requires you to interrupt a lot of dangerous
Right.
spells. Like, imagine if that happens.
Right.
You already taxed and interrupts because the dungeon you're doing actually has mechanics that a designer has tailor-made into the ad packs. Oh, and then suddenly this affix just pops up and does a new thing.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, cool,
Sounds
we're
like
just shit
shit.
out of luck. Imagine that in a group that doesn't interrupt often. Oh, boy. And maybe you're the one that's doing the heavy lifting, and it just so
A lot of
happens
angry
to
players,
spawn.
I can see it
good luck
already.
in that case. And
Failed
I bring that up
interrupts.
because the Dragonflight dungeons are already so full of abilities that are very important to CC.
Yeah.
Right? You would
CC
then
and
worry that this
interrupts
would overlap.
make or break a run. I mean, I'm not a pro Mythic Plus runner, but I know what it takes to be good at them. CCing and interrupting are top priority. And when you get a group that people aren't doing them, it's a fail. It's going to be a fail.
Average melees and classes with disrupts.
What are
because
interrupts?
it's just throwing more stuff
I don't know
onto
if
the
you're
pile.
trolling me, Sam.
And
But, I mean,
also, Blizzard, nameplate soup.
When an enemy
This
is
is
casting
more
an ability,
nameplates.
you cast something to interrupt that ability, to stop it from getting casted. Right? That's what an interrupt is. Every
In
class
a game that
in
is
the game has
massive
an interrupt,
nameplate
pretty
soup,
much.
that for a lot of people it's just overwhelming and crazy. And especially in a case where, I mean, straight up everybody, if you're doing keys, get Plater. Just get Plater. It'll
Yeah,
make things so
yeah,
much
you do
easier.
have to have
And maybe
Plater.
some of the Blizzard designers are playing with Plater turned on. That does make a lot of these things a little bit easier to
Yeah,
track.
but you just like big deeps and
but,
heals,
like,
Sam.
Blizzard, if you're designing for
what is
WoW as
utility?
you ship it, you've got
Well, let's be honest. If the DPS and heals are big enough, you can overcome every mechanic because you're just going to kill everything so fast. No mechanics occur. Just saying. Just saying. The problem is there is no deeps or heals big enough to overcome a plus 20 key. You got to do some mechanics no matter what at that point.
got to think about how readable your game is. Because it's not by default.
Yeah, default.
Entangling is the most obvious one.
default
that's going
interrupts
to
it.
cause
There's no way to do it.
issues. I think mostly just annoyances. I mean,
Just
a
kill
random
it,
slow
yeah.
that can come in at any time in a way is kind of insane and frustrating. It will cause deaths probably quite a lot. I mean, imagine Entangled during the Halls of Infusion Gauntlet at the end. Do you remember the Halls of Infusion Gauntlet at the end? Well, that would be fun. And then there's funny ones, like take the Dragon and Vortex Pinnacle, where there are winds blowing, and you want to be upwind of the dragon, because like you'll do more damage or whatever.
Right.
So if you're downwind by the dragon, not only while you're trying to go upwind are you moving slowly, but then if entangling happens during that time, for those 10 yards, you're going to be moving like, I mean, who knows how those slows will stack, I suppose. Hopefully
That sounds like a
they won't
nightmare
just
scenario.
make that insane. So yeah, it's one of those things, like you can obviously use a massive amount of tools, like boosts, blinks, freedom, that kind of thing, which is fine. Maybe that's when you save your stampeding roars for, but the random application of it means that you cannot rely on those things if you need them anyway, because the dungeon is designed by designers who are designing the dungeon around the gameplay toolkit of characters.
True.
It's kind of like the gameplay equivalent of a jump scare in a shitty horror movie, you know? You know it's coming, so you can't really relax or focus. And when it does happen, you're just pissed off because it's not good and it's cheap.
Sure.
So none of this stuff is truly abhorrent, right?
Pretty good
that's
analogy,
one that I
actually.
do want to put out there. They have, in fact, thought about these a lot. It will take a small amount of player effort just to go, click, problem solved. There are enough asterisks baked in that a competent group will rarely have issues here. And on paper, making sacrifices in talents and in what globals you use to solve problems is, good gameplay design. It is more decisions to make, the distribution of resources. But sometimes the issue is that it completely contends with what damn near everyone in the community has actually been saying that they sort of want from Mythic Plus with the experience. On the PTR forums from Solvenir, there's a good post that puts it like this. It feels like Blizzard's entire philosophy for making Mythic Plus interesting is to poke players with sharp sticks with varying intensity and frequency, and I simply have no desire to participate in a system designed to frustrate me. Now that's really interesting.
That is interesting.
Imagine if the poking with sharp sticks. Imagine if that's just, the dungeon that you're playing and the
It's kind of sad too, because when Mythic Plus came out in Legion, I loved it. I was a student in law school who didn't have time to raid, right? Like I was totally out of the raiding scene at that time. There was no way I was able to commit 4 to 5 hours to anything in game. All I had time to do was between my morning classes and my late afternoon classes, I would work out, and then I would go to the basement of the cafeteria where all degenerates were playing. There was like Nintendo Switches, and there was like a game area down there with Switches and Xbox and all this shit. And there would just be anime kids with their waifus and shit sitting in the corner, or kids playing Xbox and Switch. I would go down there after I'd get my Wingstop, right? I'd go to Wingstop at the top floor of the cafeteria, then go downstairs. Yeah, and I would have about 2 to 3 hours before class. 2 hours maybe usually. And I would just sit down there and do Mythic Plus. Yeah, nerd sussy, yeah. I would do Mythic Plus in the basement. Yes, that was how I spent my law school days. And I loved that part of Legion because it enabled me to basically keep up my item level and keep playing the expansion, even though I didn't have all the time in the world to do it. But you got to remember, back then, all Mythic Plus did was like increase like health and hits and there were no affixes back then. It was just like a harder version of the dungeon. So essentially, you were just running through. It was fun. It was fun. And then they introduced affixes, and that was fine. But as people got better at the affixes, Blizzard tried to counter that by making the affixes more annoying and difficult. And essentially now, Mythic Plus has gotten to a point where it's like on par, if not more difficult than raiding, which is silly. Based on the affix week, Mythic Plus can be more difficult than raiding, and dungeons should not be harder than raid. They just shouldn't be. And so what it does is it creates a very toxic environment where if people aren't doing the affixes right, or if it's like a bad week for affixes, people just break up groups quickly. You waste time, you get absolutely nothing out of it, and it's a bad experience. Mythic Plus has changed a lot, and Blizzard needs to rethink it.
The mechanics. Then people are not going to blame that.
Now you just plug raids in your basement.
Is this?
That's true. I guess I just always play WoW in basements. I didn't even realize that until Tidewell just said it.
It's a fun dungeon with well-designed packs or not. But the way that then the Mythic Plus
I'm still in a basement, Sam. I'm in the basement of my home.
Sprinkles in like randomly timed affixes and stuff. That is then what really disrupts that gameplay and makes it, as I think Solvenir put it, to a lot of players. I mean, Volcanic was never really a problem. It just does feel like, oh, screw you, God damn right, I'll move for Volcanic. Which I suppose can be annoying, if you're in the middle of like just actually trying to heal and playing the bit of the game that you're there to play, which maybe is like healing. And you just got the Volcanics just annoying you. And I know that there you can just be like, oh, well, get good. And no, I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm saying that it's a totally solvable problem that anybody can get around, but maybe it's annoying and not fun and doesn't add to the experience. That's sort of the question.
Yeah.
And I totally understand that these new affixes are supposed to add difficulty and, create a problem to solve and be more interesting.
You're supposed to spice up the dungeon a little bit.
More percent. And on that, mission accomplished, bag secured. But the thing is that difficulty is being added in ways that are basically do this or get fucked. I think the mission itself is flawed because it doesn't make the game more fun. It's just adding a little mini game on top that nobody really wants to play. Like, you know those times where a boss just throws a bunch of swirlies at you that have got like, they're just not tied into any other mechanic in the boss fight. And just like, Blizzard, why are you doing me with swirlies? These aren't interesting, they're just annoying. It's like that wrote large.
He's right.
Again, swear these are easy to avoid. It's just that sometimes that shit's annoying. Things like, say, imagine having to complete an extra capture before you can do your big cooldown. It's like, oh yeah, little thing, a little hoop I've got to jump through before I can do the thing I'm actually here for. If the dungeon had these mechanics baked in, you see, that would be fine, because that's the dungeon. But affixes are framed as an additional layer of go fuck yourself on top, which is where the frustration comes from. As an example, DPS discourse, or decurse being necessary on the last boss of Temple of the Jade Serpent for super high level keys was a bit annoying, and it did limit classes at those super high levels. But ultimately, it wasn't that.
I hate the end of Temple of the Jade Serpent. Hate it. Absolutely hate it. I can't stand that last bunch of pulls and shit, and it's just beyond annoying. And the fact that you need to bring certain people to be able to do it, it's garbage.
That big of a deal. Because you're fighting the boss, it's a hard boss. Those dispels are important on that boss. Rip if you don't have Master Spell in your team comp, and you just find a strategy.
Kite the ads, yeah, I know that's how you do it, but it's just garbage. It's garbage because you get to the very end and then now it gets hard.
And go and do it, and that's fine. That's
What's
texture,
up, Warband?
That's flavor, that's the unique identity of that boss. But Blizzard just coming along and kicking you in the shins while you are busy trying...
Exactly. That's why it's annoying, because it's not the dungeon. Temple of the Jade Serpent, when it came out, was fine. I didn't care about the mechanics. It's stacking those boss mechanics on top of the annoying affix mechanics. That's what makes it annoying. And there's some weeks where it's honestly, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just like, no, I don't want to do it this week. I'm not doing Temple of the Jade Serpent this week because the affixes are annoying. And then you do that last boss, and it's going to be... I've had an experience where I've gotten to the last boss and literally the healer left on the last boss. How do you think that made me feel? I damn near broke my fucking keyboard.
Trying to say, play that final fight of Temple of the Jade
Good morning,
Serpent,
Pyrie.
trying to play the dungeon. That's the bit that just doesn't feel
If you're
fun.
not using the
So from a purely
cursive,
fundamental standpoint of making the
won't explain
game
any
more
talks of
fun for
DPS to
players,
cursing.
I think these fail, even though they achieve the design goal, the bit of game
have
design,
had
that in a way you could say is pretty damn good, because they are extra problems
Maybe
to
more than
solve
once time.
that add some difficulty. And the difference between fun and the intended design, that's the problem. You can achieve your design goals and get a 10 out of 10 for my goals as written down on paper are achieved, but what if it's not good?
True.
And I'd say this to Blizzard, if you want to micro-iterate in these, just remember the good old phrase, it's not how hard you row, but it's what boat you're in. A lot of hard work honing...
It's not how hard you are while rowing, right?
a shit design, it's
Just
still
saying.
going to be, it'll be shit, but defanged, rather than be fun. So you gotta change direction, rather than hone the thing that people don't like until they can accept it. 'Cause
Yeah.
then you're just sprinkling more and more sugar in the bitter pill. What's the fix then, everybody? Is it, what do we do? Do we add difficulty without actively interrupting gameplay? How do we do this? What's the thing? So ultimately, the issue is mechanical complexity here, not necessarily difficulty. Now, obviously, complexity is a part of difficulty, but even Blizzard should remember when they talked about classes being overly bloated.
Yeah.
But, they would talk about classes being very bloated.
Well, mechanical
but, like,
difficulty, I mean, they already talked about it. They already did it with raiding. How much better is Vault of the Incarnates than Sepulchre of the first ones? Infinitely better. Why? Because Blizzard decided to stop trying to just make it difficult by creating 6,000 one-shot mechanics in a fight, a.k.a. Anduin. Right? Blizzard looked at the Anduin fight and realized all Anduin did was essentially make people quit raiding. There were so many guilds and groups, other than us, because we're professionals here, Pug Raid Central, just saying. But a lot of people just stopped at Anduin. They never got past him. Because it was, unless you had a guild that was, skilled enough to understand the mechanics, learn how to do them, or you had to wait until you got so geared that you can just burst through mechanics without doing them, that raid, I mean, also Halandris before the nerfs, was legit impossible. For a lot of people, it had reached a level of difficulty because they were trying to keep up with the race to world first that, most players were just out of it, man. They could not do it. So they already fixed that. Vault of the Incarnates doesn't have fights like that. There are, of course, difficult mechanics to do, but they make sense and they're sprinkled through. They're not like every single second. Here, you finish the first one, time to do the next one-shot mechanic, time to do it. They spread them out, right? Not every fight has 36 one-shot mechanics. There's just maybe one or two that you got to do to get through the fight. So they fixed rating. They just got to do the same for Mythic Plus. Difficulty does not mean 36 mechanics that can destroy the entire group. That's not fun. Right? Difficulty just means, yeah, you got to think a little bit while you're playing. But you don't got to be a fucking astrologist to be able to get through a fight.
Complexity doesn't equal depth.
Lack of
and I think
testing,
that
like
is
most
a situation
yeah,
where
maybe.
sometimes more problems to solve. It's not really like depth that people
There was
want.
that one
It's not
time you
really
went to
something
play
they'll
Overwatch. Yeah.
appreciate. These affixes distract from what you're doing.
Yeah,
Instead
Anduin made a lot
of
of people do crazy
changing up
things.
how you're doing what you're doing. So if we are going to take, right, and this is to start a conversation, let's take the base premise that Blizzard has, which is that affixes are not Kiss Curse at this level. They are purely a problem for you to solve, a way to add more difficulty.
Yeah.
Let's spitball a few ideas that perhaps would have a more reasonable impact in the dungeon. So
Okay.
let's have one called Bulwark. And in Bulwark, a banner spawns in the middle of a pack.
Okay.
It reduces damage taken by 50 to 90% for mobs in that pack.
Sure.
And it needs to be single target focused down.
Okay.
AoE will hit it, but maybe it has a lot of avoidance, so AoE is inefficient.
It's like the,
DPS will have to change up what they're
What
doing.
was that dungeon with the Murlocs at the beginning? The big mobs of Murlocs, and they used to drop the little banner. You guys remember that? They would drop the banner, and you got to destroy the banner, or it makes it like empowers all the Murlocs. That's kind of what he's talking about. That would be a fine mechanic. That's easy enough.
Doing for a few
Was it Halls of Valor? No, it's not Halls of Valor. What? Tazavesh? What? No. You start out in like a stormy area, and there's just tons of mobs of Murlocs. I forgot what the dungeon was called, man. I'm drawing a blank right now. But those Murlocs would drop like a fish banner, and you had to destroy it or it empowered them. Second half of Taz. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, you're right.
seconds
It is
to get
Tazavesh. Second half. That's right.
rid of the banner.
Upper
but
Taz, yep.
that's it.
That's what it was.
If that's not hard enough, maybe Blizzard could give it a ramping damage buff
Yep.
to mobs while it's up. Now, what I would
Stormy
say
Normie.
here is, in my head, I see this, I'm like, oh, this doesn't necessarily seem fun. But hey, here's what it isn't, though.
It's not
In a way,
annoying.
it's not very disruptive.
Yeah.
It's a target change
What's up,
and a
Draz? It was
slight
Gambit.
distraction
Yeah,
from
yeah, that's
AoE.
what it was.
But the key
The
thing
fish
with
stick
that
totem
is that it would not
And it
threaten
healed
to
mobs, exactly. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about essentially the fish stick totem. And I never mind that mechanic. But combine the fish stick totem with quaking, that shit was annoying. Because then you'd have like everybody running around, and then everyone's got to get back and kill the fish stick totem. Yeah, but what he's talking about is don't have quaking. Have a mechanic just like the fish stick totem. Bring it down. Everyone's got to single target it, and then continue fighting the mob. And it's AoEable. That's a good one too.
completely delete you if
Just
you've
do
not
mechanics.
done it perfectly. Maybe it slows you down, and if your group totally ignores
Just
the
do
mechanic,
mechanics
then it
becomes
becomes
annoying
a
at
little
some
bit more of
point.
a problem. But I think
When
that's
there's 36
something you could
mechanics
maybe
to do.
get to work a little bit more simply. Here's another idea.
What's up,
Let's just
Draz,
call
by
it
the way?
hot potato.
Shout out to Draz.
One mob in a pack glows
any of the
red
mods
and
here.
gets big. After taking X amount of damage from single target attacks, then the hot potato passes to another mob. So the DPS tab over to hit that other mob instead. And after a few passes, the hot potato goes cold. If it isn't passed, it explodes, doing some damage and giving players significantly increased
Some
damage
point
taken
is doing
for a
any
little while.
mechanics,
Now, this would be
I'll
a
say.
group-wide mechanic.
Well, I'm not just talking about
It
myself,
doesn't
I'm talking about
add
the whole community.
anything overly complex. There are no, there are no fun ways of dealing with it, but it's the same thing of slowing you down and making the key harder as a result. But the difference is it doesn't
RKO, what the hell does that have to do with anything? Are you telling me that your girlfriend was doing an affix while talking to you? And she had mastered the affix? I don't know.
flavor certain classes too hard. It doesn't mess with talent builds
What's up,
too
RKO?
hard. It doesn't overtax class utility too hard. And it doesn't take control away from your character. So this is the points that I guess me and Matt are trying to bring up here with the design, which
Yeah.
is you can add the difficulty, but in ways that don't overly change up and muddy the player
King
experience.
Christ, I don't even know what that
though
means. I
some
can't
of
look
these,
it up
if
on
they were
screen.
announced, people might be like, oh, I mean, that's it. Fine, whatever. It's harder, but at least my character
Doesn't
won't be
Creekstone make
dazed
steaks?
or something. There's one more idea that is a little bit more out there, and it brings up a very important concept that I think we need to think about, and I think that Blizzard utterly needs to think about too. Because in a way, I've really just realized how Ian said something to me, but the actions of the team don't mesh with the logic that he justified the removal of seasonal affixes with. Now, have you ever played a game called Super Hexagon? It's a great game. Irish game designer, Irish musician, big thumbs up. Super Hexagon's awesome. So imagine a mob got really big and glowed blue and started to pulse out rings with gaps that are safe zones, like a slower version of that Brawlers Guild fight. And you can either reposition
rings that are so he's essentially talking about like the Kurog mechanic when you're in the Earth Zone, where he pumps out a ring and you got to get to the safe spot as it runs through. I think that's what he's talking about.
In the gap to avoid the damage, and it would just be a minor reposition once at the start.
Yeah, that's easy.
Or
I wouldn't mind that.
If you don't need a hard cast, you could just jump over the ring, right? Now,
yeah, exactly.
If that was happening randomly, it would be literal hell on earth. It would probably go down as being one of the worst.
There's no holes in the ring, but there's gaps between the rings that you can stand in. Holes or gaps
ever made because of how many wipes it would kill in inopportune moments. Just like whenever you were killing the worm dude in Shadow Moon Burial Grounds, and in the bit where you have to stack before they hotfixed it, quaking could drop, and you're like, great. Quaking makes me want to go like this. The boss mechanic makes me want to go like this, so it could be terrible. But imagine it this way. What if you pick a few mobs in the dungeon and you apply it to those mobs so that based on the geometry of the dungeon and everything, there's actually an intended design instead of it just being randomly applied. Because
randomly that happens in a room that's too small for the ring to not cover the entire room. Yeah, that's the kind of shit that happens.
Point there is now it would feel more like an in-dungeon mechanic instead of a random game system suddenly slapping you with something with no rhyme or reason. It's not a perfect idea, but I think it's one that demonstrates that you can add another mechanic at a fixed level in the dungeon, actually have that really feel natural within the dungeon, and do that instead of randomly fiddling with players via an affix. And that actually might even feel like a fun new designed difficulty to add and change up gameplay in the way that a lot of popular seasonal affixes have done, where instead of being like Thundering, where it's just randomly, or not randomly like it is every 90 seconds of combat or whatever, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Where instead it's like, okay, that, and that mob are Dreadlords now. That's the change.
Yeah.
Or what they did with Season 4 of BFA. So those are three very quick ideas.
They definitely have the capabilities to do it because they did it with the Dreadlords.
Not meant to be kiss curse, and specifically meant to make the game harder. And yes, harder in a way that maybe will cause a bit of frustration, but not harder in a way that will mess up your plans for your character, be overly punishing for certain classes, or cause some of the loss of control issues, or maybe some of the random assholery that the current affixes do. Because if you come up to a mob pack and you see a banner or you see a hot potato
I thought the Dreadlords mechanic was pretty good,
when you're going into the pack, so it doesn't feel like you're being randomly fiddled with. Again,
I wouldn't mind
Liz,
it coming back.
Please.
In some
Come on, I think these are all ideas that are, I mean, yes, there are variations in a few things that you've done before, but man, I think it would be a bit more work because you maybe have to go through and place some of these by hand. But by doing
that, did it with the Dreadlords.
You can just save all your dungeons and you can cap the downsides that truly are what can make somebody have a few good Mythic Plus dungeons, 2 bad ones in a row, rage quit, and not want to engage with the system for ages.
AKA Sam.
Our idea here is not a massive pain in the ass, but a bit more difficulty. Overall, though, it's time for affixes to be looked at more closely, and even if they should exist. Like the removal of the seasonal affix, in a way that was praised, because we expected a shift in the affix design with a rework, not them to double down, because it all happened amidst the backdrop of player feedback. Looking across feedback on the forums right now, most people are actually praising the older seasonal affixes, which is fair. They were generally pretty damn good. They changed the dungeons up. Now, Blizzard is basically saying, well, we don't need that because we're doing all of these new regular affixes and we're changing up the dungeon pool. And if you think about those seasonal affixes, for the most part, they weren't random bullshittery being thrown at you. They were a change up in the design where you got to play with that extra bit of fun, more tailored, Kiss Curse difficulty, and that's why people liked it, because it wasn't, as your man said in the forums, being poked and prodded with random sticks that are differently pointy at different frequencies. And also, to what Ian said in his interview with me, I don't think you can argue that you want seasonal affixes gone because people don't play the dungeons in your pure form, and then literally refuse to let players play the dungeon in its pure form by adding a layer of just randomly dispensed bullshit on it.
Right.
It just doesn't work. So I'd say for one season, just one, maybe try to run with no affixes. Maybe just more aggressive scaling. Maybe
I would like that, honestly. That's what I would like. I don't want to have to think. I just want to know, I'm doing a plus 20. So this is like 20, a point 2 or 2% harder than a regular one. That's all I want. Take out affixes. Maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but I'd just rather a plus 20 just be harder. Like, bosses hit harder. I need to be more geared so I could do the bosses that hit harder. That's it. I personally don't like affixes at all. But if they're going to keep them, or if they want to play with the affix system, here's the thing. It's a seasonal thing. Blizzard can try new things. It's not forever. They're not adding in some lifelong mechanic. It's just a season. So I don't get why they don't experiment a little more. Try a little bit harder to not be, to not jerk us off with another unrealistic, stupid mechanic.
Try to go a little bit more.
Then people get bored 2 weeks into the season.
Affixes, right? Like you could.
I don't know, man. We've cleared the same raid 36 times. Are we bored? I don't know, maybe. But there's still gear to get, so we're gonna do it. I don't know. They could switch up the dungeon pool more, maybe. Maybe that's a better way to do it. Or keep affixes, just don't make them the same way they've been making them.
Perhaps do things there. We had that Dreadlord one at the end of Shadowlands. It was pretty cool. But maybe
the Dreadlord one was cool.
Dreadlords could be doing slightly different things, different weeks. Who knows? You could have it so that a seasonal affix is partially activated at 10, fully activated at 15. There's a lot of things that you could do. We even did an entire video on that stuff a while ago.
Yeah, they changed the dungeon pool. I'm just saying maybe do it more often if you're not going to have affixes.
At no point would I have said that a positive affix, and maybe this is something where I should have been more clear to Ian or whatever, but I would have never said that a positive affix is going to be purely like, just make the dungeon easier. No, it's got to be something, like it's got to be Kiss Curse in nature, or even positive in the way of like, a little void zone, and if you stand in it, you take a dot but deal more DPS.
That's an easy one, yeah.
Even take those boss fights where there is an area where you can do more damage, but it's a bit risky to go into. That's an idea of a positive affix that still, instead of saying move or you'll be screwed, it'll be saying move, and if you can get away with it, you'll do a bit more damage. Almost a little bit like with the design of Thundering. So I think that at least this news story with the affixes, it is some taste validation for Blizzard, right?
Yeah.
They can learn.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, Blizzard, please rethink this. Please realize that while feedback may boil down from your perspective as a game designer as people want to play the easy game, not the hard game, think that maybe the issue here is that the way you make the game harder makes it less fun.
Yes.
Not the difficulty.
Yes.
Because we know...
he's right. I would not say Razageth is an easy fight on Heroic. It's not. It's not an easy fight on Heroic. But the way it's difficult is different than the way Anduin was difficult. Or the way unnerfed Halandris was difficult. They're just different. They're different ways of making the fight hard. Right? You can get hard in different ways. Not every way you get hard is a good way to get hard. That goes in many things.
People are happy to play a hard game if it's fun. The biggest games on Earth right now are really fucking hard.
Screw you,
If you played Valorant or CSGO or
We're a
like
football school,
high-end
not a basketball school.
MOBAs, they're hard. People are fine to play rock hard punishing games. but it's got to be fun. And I always, there's one thing that I like about, and I know it's the most trite thing in the universe
Halandras wasn't
to become
untested,
Dark
was he?
Souls. But one
I know
of the
they
reasons
didn't
why
test
Dark
the
Souls
jailer.
went well, and why it was able to, as an example, you know, you have Horizon's Forbidden West that gets utterly BTFO'd.
Yeah, Sam, he
by
was
Elden
supposed to
Ring.
be a final boss.
Horizon's sitting there with all of its different
He was
difficulty settings and all of its
unbelievably
things, and Elden Ring's just like, nah.
Even for a
the
final
difficulty
boss.
setting is like what weapon you choose, what build you choose. The thing that people liked from the difficulty of those Souls games, because in a way, a Souls game compared to, say, what I see fighting game players pull off, what I see high-end StarCraft players play off, in a way you could almost say that those games, they do have a very big level of simplicity and ease, as in they're not uber mechanically hard games, but what they are is they are punishing. But they balance being punishing with being very simple and very clear, presenting the player
Right.
with their own set of tools, the enemy
Simple and clear. If you die, you know why you died, and you know how to fix it. Sometimes in WoW in the past and with affix, sometimes you die and you got to look back. You be like, "What the hell happened? Why did I die?" You don't even know. You can't even understand it because
set
there's
of
so many
tools.
complicated mechanics going on. You can't figure out what killed you.
That's that. Imagine seasonal Elden Ring, where you basically add
Yeah, nobody
Diablo-like
played.
boss
Come on, no,
affixes
Elden Ring. What are you talking about? Everybody played Elden Ring. Title. What are you talking about?
onto characters. You can immediately see how something that was once nice, simple, worked, just turns into gobbledygook.
Right.
Now, obviously, Blizzard are going to be thinking, well, the difference there is World of Warcraft, and one of the differences, it's a bloody different game. Also, you have, you have teammates, all the stuff with like different builds, and then I say, yeah, a degree of that's fine, but as a game designer, you should put that in your dungeon design,
Sure.
not in your random bullshit.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think Blizzard they're continually taking the thing of good game design is a series of interesting decisions for the player to make. And it's like, yeah, but guess what? Your boy Sid Meier wasn't making Mythic Plus dungeons. He was making the Civilization games, which are very different. So yes, interesting decisions is important.
Yes.
But how much do you like index on that? How weighted are you towards raw second-to-second game feel versus big interesting decisions?
Raw dogging.
Because ultimately, a lot of
That's what
games
it
like
feels like.
Civ could probably be turned into a spreadsheet, and for those who could deal with a spreadsheet UI for Civ, they'd still have a blast
How
because
was it, Tundra? Did you
of
like
the
it?
interesting decisions. But that ain't World of Warcraft. The balance is wrong, and I think they need to change some of their design defaults. I think it's a departure away from the philosophies that have made Dragonflight an excellent expansion. And I think there's a reason that M Plus is so divided in the community right now, you know? Anyway, that's all I've got to say for things
Tide well
today.
behaved.
It's frustrating to have Blizzard taking win over win over win over win, only to drop the ball turbo hard in this one. But
Yeah, Count
this
Duke and
is
stuff was great.
the
in
newer
there.
Blizzard. They are way better at taking feedback on board. Hopefully they either reduce how frustrating these are,
Go
or
ahead, RKO.
in an ideal world, change their design direction. That is it for me. I would love it if you leave your comments down below to help us all understand what's going on. I'll see you next time.
Yes, great video. Was the title a bit dramatic? Yeah, but that's Bellular for you. Not bad, not bad.